Okay. Together with that, there is another process. Law enforcement, law and order organization and structure is being eroded. For the last 20, 25 years, if you see old movies and new movies, you can see that in new movies, a policeman, an officer of the United States Army looks dumb, angry, psychotic, paranoid. A criminal looks nice, kind of, well, he smokes hash and shoots the whatever drug, but basically he's a nice human being. He's creative. And he's unproductive only because society oppresses him. Whereby a general of Pentagon is always, by definition, a war maniac. A policeman is a pig, rude policeman. He abuses his power. No? A generalization like that. The hatred, the mistrust to the people who are supposed to protect you and enforce law and order.
The erosion of law and order in enemy countries has always been a goal for the KGB. This is what they did to South Africa, and they are now trying to do the same thing to Western countries, such as the US, Canada, and Britain with this defund the police movement. After George Floyd's death, communists are capitalizing on people's emotions to promote their agenda. Let's focus on the facts and look at how inadequate policing has affected South Africa.
But it was an unstable transition. Severe racial prejudice continued under the black majority. The new government disbanded the South African Defense Force, a skilled army but also a painful reminder of the forced segregation of apartheid. This shakeup left many white officers without jobs or demoted beneath their less experienced black counterparts, who were elected to leadership roles in the government, army, and police force, often without proper training or experience. Some of these white former officers left the government altogether and took their skills to the private sector. Over the years, this continual shift has left the country with an embarrassing police force. Reports of police brutality in South Africa have more than tripled in the last decade. Faith in the system is severely strained, as only 1 in 100 cases filed against officers actually results in criminal conviction.
Communists have brainwashed liberals into believing that police brutality is based on white supremacy, and in order to fix this, you have to abolish the police. But in reality, police brutality more than tripled in South Africa when blacks took control of the country. In 2019, the American police fatally shot 9 unarmed blacks and 19 unarmed whites. And I'm sure some liberals watching this will claim that the police are racist because of the proportion of the population blacks make up. Well, in 2018, African Americans made up 53% of known homicide offenders in the US and committed about 60% of the robberies, despite being 13% of the population. So the police usually kill more whites than blacks. But most of the media will only focus on black people getting killed by police. Why? Because they have an agenda. They portray violent criminals as nice human beings, and they do this over and over again. There were 20,336 murders in South Africa between April 2017 and March 2018. That puts the country's murder rate at close to 36 people murdered per 100,000. That's 57 people murdered each day. Because of the lack of policing, South Africa's murder rate is now similar to war zones in Somalia, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Iraq. In the first half of 2020, South Africa has the highest rape rate in the world at 132.4 per 100,000. That's 66,196 rapes in 6 months. But the real number is actually higher, as a lot of rapes in South Africa go unreported because the police there are useless. Here's Mabel Jansen, a South African judge who resigned amid public pressure after posting offensive comments on Facebook. Let's see what she had to say. Quote, Gillian, do you believe that I am even propositioned by my black colleagues who tell me that they will be in Hotel X and expect me to report there at a specific time? I am shell-shocked. In their culture, a woman is there to pleasure them, period. It is seen as an absolute right, and a woman's consent is not required. You may find this hard to accept and unpalatable, as did I. I still have to meet a black girl who was not raped at about 12. I am dead serious. It is only now that women realize that they have rights and have to be taken up seriously that we are being hit by the veritable tsunami of rape cases. But we often have to hear that it was only about the third time that they sought to report it that they were taken up seriously. Mothers are so brainwashed that they tell the children that it is the father's birthright to be first. I must hand you 10, 20, 30, 40 files and you will adopt a completely different attitude. The white people have a lot to account for, but this? I feel like vomiting. So no, the black people are by far no angels. Their conduct is despicable. Murder is also not a biggie, and gang rapes of baby, daughter, and mother a pleasurable pastime. That in reality is the flip side of the coin. They are simply now in a position to branch out and include white women. No, Gillian, the true facts are most definitely not that espoused by the liberals. End quote. Some of you may find her comments offensive, but I think it's important to stress how dangerous it is in South Africa. The rape epidemic in the country is so bad that the black women there started a campaign called Am I Next?, where they are demanding the death sentence for any man who rapes a woman.
I think we can't pick out certain incidents that don't go our way and act like the cops are all bad. I hate when we do that because think about it. Do you know how bad some of these neighborhoods would be if it wasn't for the cops?
Because of inadequate policing, South Africa has become one of the most violent places in the world for women and girls. Yet there are so many liberal women calling for the police to be abolished. If the police were defunded and rapes began to increase, I guarantee these women would be the first ones calling for the death penalty for any man committing rape. Most liberal women are mentally sick. They think they can survive without law and order. They usually end up learning the hard way. NFL legend Herschel Walker offered to fly defund the police supporters to countries without law enforcement. I wish they took him up on his offer, but we all know they won't do that.
It is the same station that was emptied and boarded up as demonstrators took over the area in the so-called Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, as some are calling it. Our Como News cameras, take a look, followed the chief back into the station where she had a chance to inspect the now mostly empty building. Her goal is to reopen the precinct and have officers return to the neighborhood.
Our calls for service have more than tripled. These are responses to emergency calls, rapes, robberies, and all sorts of violent acts that have been occurring in the area that we're not able to get to. So it is not right for us not to be able to deploy our officers here. We owe that service to everybody.
When the Seattle police were ordered to abandon the East Precinct, calls for service more than tripled. Rapes, robberies, and other violent crimes increased because the police were not there to stop them. After Minneapolis was destroyed by riots, Ilhan Omar called for the Minneapolis Police Department to be disbanded, not reformed, but completely dismantled.
And I will never stop saying, not only do we need to disinvest in police, but we need to completely dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department.
Women were being raped during the Minneapolis riots because the retarded protesters were blocking traffic and preventing the police from doing their jobs. Ilhan does not care about innocent people being raped. She wants to dismantle the police and turn the United States into South Africa post-communist revolution. Her daughter, Isra Hirsi, called US soldiers bitches and basically called for a communist revolution. These are black communists, just like we've seen in South Africa. Now we're seeing so many people hold up communist fists. What does that remind you of? The African National Congress was dominated by members of the South African Communist Party and received $80 million a year from Moscow. Their military commander, Joe Slovo, was a colonel in the KGB. In the book Soviet Strategy in Southern Africa by Peter Vanneman, he explains that a major Soviet strategic interest in South Africa has always been that region's strategic minerals. Of the 200 Council for Mutual Economic Assistance Enterprises in the Third World, half are in Africa. 75% of them are in Southern Africa, mostly in mining. Coker argues that Eastern Europe is increasingly concerned both about protecting its investment in mining in the area and about its future access to minerals. Coker tends to confirm the insights of Dugnan and Gahn, that as Soviet mineral reserves diminish and become more expensive to extract, Moscow's interest in access to Southern Africa's minerals may grow. There was segregation, and a lot of people felt changes needed to be made. But the KGB wanted to collapse the Afrikaner government so that they could control their natural resources. And the average black South African got played as a useful idiot. Their lives are actually worse now than it was during apartheid. Even CNN admits this, quote, "In fact, despite 25 years of democracy, South Africa remains the most economically unequal country in the world, according to the World Bank. The Rainbow Nation is even more divided now than it was in 1994. Previously disadvantaged South Africans hold fewer assets, have fewer skills, earn lower wages, and are still more likely to be unemployed."
And now more than ever, this all these conversations, they make you ask the question: is the black South African better off post-apartheid? What are your thoughts?
That's a very difficult question.
Economically better.
Economically, it's difficult because first of all there wasn't a lot of data as far as for blacks in general, as far what they annually made and things of that nature. So it's kind of hard to say what the exact progress is. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, when I conducted my interviews and talked to a lot of women from both the formal and informal sector, many of the women in the informal sector, particularly in the Durban area, said that they're doing worse economically than what they did under apartheid, which blew me away. I didn't expect to hear that at all.
Here's an article from the South African Jewish Report titled, "Joe Slovo, Anti-Zionist Universalist Who Fought for a Just Cause." It turned out that Slovo was employed by the Russians in the 1970s when he had been in exile from South Africa to go town to town in Lithuania to try to convince the people, who all oppose the Russian occupation, that they should be supportive of Russia and be good communists. I know some of you are thinking, wait a minute, Joe Slovo was one of God's chosen people. Why is he anti-Zionist? It's called controlled opposition. Winnie Mandela promoted Soviet propaganda as well, quote, "In Soviet Russia, genuine power of the people has been transformed from dreams into reality." In case some of you are skeptical, here's a 2013 article from Russia Beyond titled, "Mandela and the Soviet Union, the Struggle Against Apartheid." Quote, "When Nelson Mandela turned 95 in July, Russian President Vladimir Putin gave one of the most glowing tributes to the great leader. Your name is inseparably linked with an entire epoch of Africa's modern history that heralded the building of the new and democratic Republic of South Africa," Putin said. He also praised Mandela's role in developing ties between Russia and South Africa. Mandela maintained a soft spot for Russia even after the collapse of the Eastern Bloc. In 1990, the same year that he was released from prison, the Soviet Union awarded Mandela the Lenin International Peace Prize. On April 30, 1999, Mandela, on a state visit to Moscow, was awarded 2 honorary doctorates from the Russian Academy of Sciences. During the state visit, Mandela expressed gratitude for the solidarity of the Russian people in the South African fight against apartheid and for freedom. From the 1960s until the early 1990s, the Soviet Union trained thousands of cadres of MK, the armed wing of the ANC, to fight against the racist regime. Mandela's state visit in 1999 set the tone for greater cooperation between Russia and South Africa. During that visit, Mandela and then-President Boris Yeltsin signed a declaration pledging to boost political ties and economic relations in areas such as gold and diamond production. Since that time, the countries have stepped up bilateral and multilateral cooperation. Moscow was the strongest advocate for South Africa to be included in the grouping of the world's most dynamic emerging economies, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, which was renamed from BRIC to BRICS. The ANC was funded by the KGB, and Black Lives Matter is also tied to Russian intelligence. The founders of Black Lives Matter, Alicia Garza, Patrisse Cullors, and Opal Tometi, all work for front groups of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. It's common knowledge in the intelligence community that these socialist and communist party organizations are tied to Russian intelligence, and there is also evidence of that. The FRSO works to promote Russia's geopolitical interests. After Russia invaded Crimea, the FRSO held a rally chanting, "No US intervention in Ukraine." Why? Because they wanted to help Russia maintain its illegal annexation of the territory. They were also framing Ukraine as fascist, and this is literally Russian government propaganda. Not only is Black Lives Matter tied to Russia through the FRSO, but a lot of the Black Lives Matter accounts on social media were traced back to St. Petersburg. The Internet Research Agency is owned by Putin's chef Yevgeny Prigozhin, who receives billions of dollars of contracts from the Russian government. He also funds Russian private military, the Wagner Group, and works with GRU, Russian military intelligence. In case some of you are new and haven't seen the evidence, link is in the description. Alexander Dugin, geopolitical advisor to Putin and others in the Kremlin for over a decade, wrote in the Foundations of Geopolitics that Russian special services should make use of the political forces of Afro-American racists. And that book where he wrote that is used in Russian military institutions. His own website admits this. Just 2 weeks ago, Dugin wrote on Facebook that what Black Lives Matter and Antifa are doing now in the USA is a positive thing because it will lead to Americans going to war against each other. So the KGB used black communists to destroy South Africa from within? And today Russian intelligence is using black communists to destroy America from within.
Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists. We are super versed on sort of ideological theories, and I think that what we really try to do is build a movement that could be utilized by many, many black folk.
Black Lives Matter is a communist organization. One of its founders, Alicia Garza, is a self-proclaimed Marxist. She's one of God's chosen people, and she's not exactly doing what's best for black people. I'll show you what I mean. In 2018, there were 2,925 black homicide victims. 2,600 of them were murdered by other blacks, compared to only 234 murdered by whites. Black Lives Matter does not genuinely care about black people dying. Blacks murder each other every day, but Black Lives Matter never protests against that. Never. They only protest when a black person is killed by a white person. Why? So they can incite blacks to commit violence against whites and burn the country to the ground. Creating chaos and destroying America from within has always been the communist goal.
Here is a book that I think ought to be in every home library. It's entitled Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson. He joined the party as a young man because he honestly believed that the communists were trying to improve the conditions of his people. He was a dedicated communist, and eventually he rose to one of the highest ranks. But after many years, he discovered that instead they were merely planning to use his people in a bloody revolution to destroy America. And when he woke up to this, he dropped out of the party and devoted the rest of his life trying to alert his fellow citizens of all races to the true nature of the Communist Party as he knew it to be from the inside.
That throughout the entirety of my time underground in South Africa under apartheid, every house I slept in, every dinner I ate, every car I drove in was provided by Jewish activists of the African National Congress.
George Galloway was involved in South Africa's communist revolution, and he admitted that God's chosen people played a major role in it. We're also seeing them play a major role in today's cultural revolution in the West. Ben & Jerry's tweeted, "The murder of George Floyd was the result of inhumane police brutality that is perpetuated by a culture of white supremacy." Problem is, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield are not white. They are God's chosen people, and they do not care about racism at all. They operate in Israeli settlements where they bulldoze Arab homes to create neighborhoods where only God's chosen people can live. So Ben & Jerry's are in fact racist, but they pretend to care about racism in order to promote this white supremacy narrative. This white supremacy brainwashing psychologically disarms whites, while at the same time incites blacks to commit violence against whites. After George Floyd's death, there are so many videos online of blacks attacking random white people, regardless of their age. This is exactly what is happening in South Africa. Joe Slovo was also one of God's chosen people. Let's take a look at how he began inciting blacks to commit violence against whites decades ago.
Shoot to kill, Kumasa. Shoot to kill, kill 'em. Kiss the poor, the farmer. Kiss the poor, the farmer. Brr, pa, pa. Brr, pa, pa.
Today on the 1st of September 2018, I just planted my dad's cross here. He was murdered 25th of May 2017. There's over 4,000 crosses on this mountain. This is a monument. If you look down, I'm at the back of it. There are just thousands of crosses and they're all over the mountains. We need help. Today we put my dad's cross on the mountain. It's up there. All these names are all the new crosses added. Farm murders are real. We need your help.
So the apartheid regime was replaced by a more racist and violent system. The violence against white farmers is essentially encouraged by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who announced plans to seize white farmers' land without compensation. There are some black South Africans saying to each other, "We have to stop murdering white farmers because we can't produce what they can. If they're gone, we're gonna starve to death." A similar situation happened in Zimbabwe, formerly one of Africa's richest economies. In 2000, President Robert Mugabe forced 4,000 white farmers to give up their land. Zimbabwe's agricultural output dropped almost overnight. There was an immediate food shortage and people went hungry. The move was followed by 2 years of bad harvests and an extended dry spell, leading to the country's worst famine in 60 years. In the midst of chronic shortages of basic goods, the central bank ramped up its money printing machines to finance imports. The result was rampant inflation. Unemployment soared, public services collapsed, and the economy shrank by 18% in 2008. Zimbabwe abandoned its currency in 2009, leaving transactions to be conducted in US dollars, South African rand, and 7 other currencies. Mugabe is now dead, and the new government is giving land back to the white farmers after he wrecked the economy. Recently, the UN has come out in support of Antifa, not wanting it to be designated as a terrorist organization. Anyone with a properly functioning brain can see that it is a terrorist organization. If you look into the UN's leadership, you'll find that a lot of them are Marxist-Leninists. They're portraying Antifa as peaceful. This is the same thing they did for the communists in South Africa.
When white miners stationed in this small country, African country, were murdered by so-called National Liberation Movement, this is the result. Raped and murdered after your donations. And who is supporting these movements? Of course, United Nations. I don't know how many people noticed the striking similarity between the emblem of United Nations and emblem of the USSR. Do you think it's coincidence? The symbolism is obvious, unless you are blind, of course.
Nelson Mandela was a KGB asset, but he was trained by the Mossad as well. They did not recruit him. He specifically went to the Israelis. Nelson Mandela apparently underwent weapons training by Mossad agents in Ethiopia in 1962 without the Israeli Secret Service knowing his true identity, according to an intriguing secret letter lodged in the Israeli State Archives. Mandela visited other African countries in 1962 in order to drum up support for the African National Congress's fight against the apartheid regime in South Africa. While in Ethiopia, he sought help from the Israeli embassy using a pseudonym, David Mopsari, according to the letter, classified top secret, which was sent to officials in Israel in October 1962. Its subject line was the Black Pimpernel, a term used by the South African press to refer to Mandela. It added that the man had shown interest in the methods of the Haganah, a Jewish paramilitary organization that fought against the British rulers and the Arab population of Palestine in the 1930s and 40s. It went on. He greeted our men with shalom, was familiar with the problems of Jewry and of Israel, and gave the impression of being an intellectual. The staff tried to make him into a Zionist. In conversations with him, he expressed socialist worldviews and at times created the impression that he leaned towards communism. It now emerges from photographs that have been published in the press about the arrest in South Africa of the Black Pimpernel that the trainee from Rhodesia used an alias, and the two men are one and the same.